The Bothy Storytelling Podcast is a member of the Alberta Podcast Network, powered by ATB. Welcome one and all to the Bothy Storytelling Podcast, a new day. And today's podcast, we have a chat with a very interesting podcaster from Calgary and also a gentleman who's an entrepreneur. But we'll get to that in a minute. I don't want to introduce him. I'll let him do that himself. Before we get to that chat, though, let us hear from one of our sponsors. And today our sponsor is Let's Do Coffee. Now, Let's Do Coffee by the Moji Centre at NAIT is hosted by Daniel Van Vielen and produced by the Moji Centre for New Venture and Student Entrepreneurship at NAIT. Each episode features an interview with a student entrepreneur or NAIT alumnus, and they dive into topics that explore their challenges, questions and fears involved in operating their companies. It comes out every 2 weeks, and if you want to find a wee bit more about it, go to nait.ca/Moji Centre. That's nait.ca/Moji Centre, hosted by Daniel Van Vielen. That's Let's Do Coffee. And that is today's sponsor for the Bothy Storytelling Podcast. But let's move on to our conversation, to our chat, and let's introduce our guest. Here today on the Bothy Storytelling Podcast, we have Kyle in the studio. Now, I'm going to let Kyle introduce himself properly because he does a wealth of projects around Calgary, podcasting. He has his studio. I'm going to let him tell you a wee bit about himself first.
Yeah, I mean, I could drone on for a little bit. I'll try and keep this as brief as possible. My name is Kyle Marshall. I own something called MediaLabs YYC, which is in downtown Calgary. It is a business that focuses on helping people and businesses create their own YouTube videos or online videos, at least, and their own podcasts. I also create my own stuff. So I have my own YouTube channel where I talk about the adaptations of books. So I read the book, watch the movie, and then kind of talk about it on that channel. And then I have a few different podcasts that are on the Alberta Podcast Network, along with your podcast here too.
Excellent. Thanks very much, Kel. Well, thank you for coming into my compact and Beijing studio today. I really appreciate it. And the reason I've invited you here today is, well, one, you're part of the Alberta Podcast Network. Two, we've now known each other on and off for about a year.
Yeah, I would say that.
And Kyle, with his Media Lab, invited me to do some storytelling, which was a great experience. So Kyle knows story. He's got an idea, and what he does in his studio, in the Media Lab, is kind of working in what I call the broad realm of storytelling. So I'm going to just throw a quick question, because when I do a chat with someone, I don't want to make this a ask question interview style. I just want to kind of like get your randomness as well. And
we're
also,
actually reading off of scripts right now.
To
try and make this feel as natural as possible.
You have just ruined the magic of this podcast. You know that I've promised that I didn't have any scripts, all this paperwork pinned to the walls. It's just, I'm also in my grand's basement. I'm lying to you. I'm still living in Scotland. Storytelling. What is storytelling to you? That's probably a great just starting question for anyone.
I mean, I can answer this in two ways. I guess in general, for me, storytelling has always been like an actual person telling a story. Like, I mean, when I was growing up, I loved adventure stories. It was like my bread and butter. There was some Saturday morning cartoons I liked to watch a lot, and they were all geared around high adventure, swashbuckling, and I was like, oh, that was a good story that you were put onto, and that continued on as I got into more reading and that sort of thing. I think that in today's world, I think that is a bit of a buzzword that gets used in businesses, where it's like, tell your story, use storytelling, which I think is true. I think people, by and large, are attuned to really love the story behind the thing or the product or the business that they're supporting, rather than just the thing by itself. And you can definitely use that effectively in your own marketing. But I also think it's like the word synergy now, where it's sometimes losing its meaning a little bit.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Excellent. So, Kyle, as you know about this podcast, if you've listened to it, which I know you have, I let kind of all the randomness happen. Okay, so I'm listening to you, and I've just discovered one weakness in my studio is definitely my door. As I'm listening to you out the corner of my ear, I'm hearing tinkle, tinkle.
I know there's a little cat scratching at that door, I think.
Yes, and any of the listeners to the Bothy knows we have basically Una, who is a pest to the podcast. But the problem is today, I've locked Hamish out. The studio dog is out. The reason I did this is because it is a small studio and it gets really warm in here.
Yeah,
Kyle will start to notice this very soon. So having 3 human or not humans, physical entities in here is going to be tough. But Kyle, I love what you say because you have hit the nail on the head for me on a few things there. It's a word that is being overly used, and I use it a lot as well. I live the world of storytelling, and I move into business storytelling, but it definitely has been overused. It's become almost one of those crazy wee buzzwords.
Right.
It's like everything is story. Oh, this story, that story, this story, and I don't know about you, but I'm a bit like you. I look at story as the traditional stuff, but I also see that story is everything. But how do you? I mean, you're working in this media lab, so you're dealing with a whole broad spectrum of people. How are you finding people are using story or storytelling in your industry? I mean, how do you find? Is it being overused or is it being misunderstood? Is it being wrongly expressed? I mean, have you encountered any great examples of this?
Yes, is the quick answer, I guess, to your question. I think it is being somewhat misunderstood. I think people look at story as being, I have a beginning, middle, and end, and it's really the end goal of this thing that we're creating is so people either buy our product or come to our store or whatever it happens to be. And it's actually something that I think about a whole lot. And without naming names of the people that I'm working with, one thing that I've been tripping over and really pushing clients to think about is that people are smart. And so if they can smell this is just an advertisement, they're not really keen to continue watching or listening or whatever it happens to be. The best thing that you can do is being, hey, we're this entity, whatever kind of company business we actually are, but also we have real people that work for us. So let's talk about those real people as well. I think that focusing on that, so meaning, I'm just going to use a random example. Let's say that you are like a hotel of some kind, like a boutique hotel. I don't think it's enough anymore to be like, oh, we have like these cool prices, or like, look at our rooms, or look at this great architecture that we have here. It's like, no, let me know about Nancy who runs the front desk, or let me know about the reason why the hotel was built in the first place, or let me know that kind of information, because telling a story like, oh, you can come here and do this, and it's only this much money, it's not engaging, it's not interesting to people. They want to hear those human stories.
That's it. You bang, straight on the head there. Storytelling is a human craft. I've said it for years. It's all about the interaction, and you have literally just got it perfect. It's about the human story. It's about the people behind the story. Some of the more successful corporate tales have utilized that. They can tell. I think the best example, I promoted a book, one of the TED Talk books, and it was all about the kind of background to the corporate stories and how these people presented themselves. And Starbucks was always the one that jumped out at me. It's no longer the case. The guy who founded has stepped down or moved on. But it's like, hey, he kind of had compressed his story into 30 seconds, but it was still an impactful story about his origin. And how it was founded and created. And I think that makes a hell of a difference in this world. You need to really express the human side of things. Forget the benefits, forget the packages, just tell people who you are. And I think it sells a lot more. I mean, there was a
the moan outside the door.
Whine that comes from outside the door. I always said, people, I don't stop this anymore. I let all the chaos just happen. I really need to soundproof this door better. This is the next project for this studio. But there was a kind of thing that had come to me when I was thinking about that, because you obviously have a business yourself. You know, you're running the Media Lab. You have all your projects. What is the story behind the Media Lab?
Well, here's the kind of the compressed version of the story. So I never in my life believed that I would be an entrepreneur. And it wasn't really something that I was geared towards or wanted or was driving towards. But because I was so enamored by a lot of the online media, like I started watching YouTube back in 2005 when it first started. I just thought, oh, this is going to really change entertainment. I really saw it in its first few months. And then when I got into podcasting, I was like, oh, these are telling like really human, engaging stories, and through audio, I think this is really great. It doesn't have to conform to a certain time frame or anything like that. And so I go to a conference, or have gone to a conference now for the last 9 years, something called VidCon, which happens down in Anaheim. And it's all about online video and the business of it and the people who do it. And I've loved it. I've gone since the very first year where it was 1,500 people in the basement of a hotel. And now it's like, what was it, 15 or 16,000 people came last year. It's gotten huge.
Yep.
Google owns something called YouTube Spaces. And it's like they're in New York and LA and London. And I think there's even one in Toronto. So some of the really bigger centers, Google owns these places that have green screens and recording centers and editing bays and sets that you can go and utilize and classes that they put on. And so I was at VidCon. I was like, oh, I should go visit this YouTube space while I'm down here. I've always wanted to go to one. And before I left, I just double-checked their website, and I discovered, somewhat in the fine print, though, that you actually aren't able to go into the premises. You actually have to have a certain amount of subscribers to even get into the front door. And so at least I didn't waste the trip to get there and find out, which is nice. But it really ticked me off. And again, I'm not that type of person, really, that gets mad all that often, but it really made me stew. And so by the time I landed back in Calgary, I was like, I think Calgary should have a space of their own that can actually do this. That was then the start of this 18-month journey where I definitely talked to some business coaches, tried to refine my idea, realized because it would be a business I would have to make money somehow for people. But the main goal was like, anybody can come, anybody can learn, and I don't want to close it off based on how popular you are. I don't know. Maybe it's just me becoming a socialist in my old age. I don't know. But,
No, I've been to the Media Lab. As I say, I've done a storytelling event there. I've done a couple of kind of meets there as well with people, and it is a fantastic space. You've created a lovely little area, and I love the fact that we don't need to subscribe to be there. You know, we don't need 10 subscribers, because I would struggle with my YouTube channel.
Sure.
Yeah, it's crazy. Now, Kyle, I'm going to pause for a second.
Sure.
Okay, I'm back again after just a very quick pause. I realized that I hadn't shut the studio door properly, and the reason that we were hearing Hamish was because there was a crack, and Kyle was looking at the crack and was too polite to point out that I was a numpty and didn't lock the studio door. Now we do have Hamish in the studio to stop him whining. He has been invited in and, as usual, has slumped and fallen asleep. This is always a good way. So, Kyle, let us continue our chat now that we have the dog, and the heat will build up. I promise. It's one of these things about this wee studio. We were just talking, just for a quick couple of minutes there, about ventilation and all that. And if anyone owns studios or has their studios, one of the biggest problems is trying to keep sound out. Kyle in Media Labs does have a wee studio. You've got a wee sound booth, is it, or is it a vocal booth?
We have a single sound booth. And I actually, since you were there last, we have actually moved down the hallway slightly into a different room. And the reason primarily that I did that was it was getting out of some of the sound walking of people walking past the front of the studio. And I'm not going to dress this up. It's the closet, but it's big enough that I can fit a table, 2 or 3 people, well, actually 3 or 4 people inside of there. To like really enclose it, so if I'm doing more than one person that wants to do a podcast, then they can. And so the foam is on its way. Right now I have hung up some blankets, some moving blankets around, just to cut off some of the bouncing of the of the people talking. So once I get all that foam, I can really dress it up really nicely inside of that area.
We were just chatting about that. Now, anybody who is wanting to do voiceover work or podcasting or anything recorded, there is something that I didn't mention in my previous podcast, because I mentioned, I was talking about the How Not to Podcast. And there's a beautiful thing that everybody in this industry, we'll just call it generically, the industry of vocal work or podcasting, loves. And it's one of these dirty little secrets that we all love but try to keep out of the public eye. And that is moving blankets. Moving blankets. Yeah. They're amazing. You all know from the images and my discussions, that was my first sound booth. It was moving blankets over an old frame. Kyle, who has his studio, he's obviously waiting on his acoustic foam, is using them. It works. They are a great thing to use, because the other side is getting proper acoustic foam. Now, I'm in a room with Kyle. We're about, if I remember correctly, I think the measurements were 7, just under 7 by just under 6, something like that. Maybe 5.5 to 6. And I have about 3/4 of this room, would you say, Kyle? Maybe just under 3/4 acoustic. And that costs probably close to $600 just to do such a small space. So I want you guys to think about that.
I bet you the only people who spend more on like their quote unquote hobby is people who get like super into D&D, and they get like their little miniatures and like all their dice that they have to get, and like the boards and like literally everything that they want to.
Oh, I mentioned D&D so many times now, and I think it's because of that. I've started to see the correlation between studio work and D&D. Mm-hmm. We are both incredibly passionate, geeky groups. I don't know about you, Kyle, but I am constantly looking at magazines, brochures of new equipment, and drooling all the time. My studio is very basic, but at the same time, it's pretty much the only thing that I've looked at. And I'm going to ask you this question. We're here. This is a podcast chat with you, and this is going to be random and about everything. Equipment.
Yes.
What is your perfect setup? Let the listeners know what a good studio should be compared to an amateur studio.
Well, I don't know. To be honest with you, besides like, I guess, quality of foam and actually like getting someone like a soundproof expert into to really like lock it down, I don't think that there's a whole lot of difference necessarily. At least for my setup, what I'm actually trying to build towards, definitely when I started MediaLab, began with what I could afford and still sounded really good. Yeah. And it's been slowly kind of building up the arsenal afterwards. But some sort of audio interface, I'm actually finding out that it's kind of better to be recording directly to, say, like a Zoom recorder, or there's like Tascam things, instead of recording directly to a computer, because computers can randomly decide not to want to work and stuff like that. I still record to a computer. I'll be very upfront about that. But apparently when you read all the reports and stuff, it's better to record to something else that's geared towards just audio recording. But I mean, microphones are like this weird thing where, yes, the more expensive they are, the better they're probably going to sound, quote unquote. But there gets to be a point where you're getting minimal improvements versus what you're actually spending. Like a good $200 to $300 microphone is probably going to be just as good as a $600 microphone that you can buy, depending on the environment that you're in. But in this kind of thing where it's soundproof with the foam and the roof and everything like that, like you don't need to go and spend $800, $700 on like the top end microphones out there in the industry. It's just not going to give you that much more.
Yep. Yeah. Well, I mean, I kidded myself out. We were talking about this just before we started. I kidded myself out with the Rode NT1As, which initially I was unsure about. I got it, and then the biggest problem I've mentioned is all the time is the Scottish We can't help it. It's when I talk to people, I hear it, and it drives me insane. So we're sitting here, and I have wind guards on my microphones. I have a pencil down the front of mine, which is to help break that, and I also have my pop shield. It's like the ultimate overkill in microphone use. But I love the NT1As now. They're about $300 from, I'll do a plug for Long and McQuaid. It doesn't matter. They won't ever give me anything for free. But and I thoroughly enjoy them. I let Kyle have a wee listen to himself in them. And
My voice sounds good, doesn't it?
Yeah, you've got to, I don't know, listeners, I think I'm going to lose my position of having the telephone directory read here because Kyle's voice is just gorgeous through these mics in my mind. It's nice and deep and sonorous. It's beautiful. But what are you using in your studios, just out of interest? What do you use?
What I did when I first opened up was get the, I'm going to totally forget what the brand name is. ARC I believe, is what they're called, an ARC model. It was $160 was what each microphone is. I got 4 of them. One I put into the audio booth for the single people, and then I have 3 of them set up for like kind of group interviews and stuff like that.
But you're using them for the general public as well.
Yeah, exactly.
So, I mean, there's a huge difference. You're trying to get good quality sound for everyone, but you also need to balance it up because I would be the same, I feel. You know, I wouldn't be, although these are $300 mics, to some people that's pocket change in this world.
Exactly.
But I would still be wary about having these in a public environment being generically used. Mm-hmm. So I can understand that you've went for a good quality after research, because knowing you for a year, I know you're probably one of those guys who will sit down with the magazines and the online checks and basically make sure you're getting something that is going to work for you. But you also want to make sure that, well, if somebody's going to be foolish, that you're not going to be too bad.
That's the thing. When you deal with the general public, you realize, for good or for ill, sometimes how careless the general public actually is. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing. Like, one of the things that I learned as a business owner is pricing things appropriately, right? Because people, unfortunately, if things are not that much money or free, especially if it's free, they don't treat it with the same respect as if they're actually spending their own money on it, sort of thing.
Very true. Yeah.
It's going to be an all around good microphone, that sort of thing. But not breaking the bank at the same time. Yeah.
Your statement there about the free as to paid is a big thing that I've experienced as well. It's across the board, so it's not even in your studio. Mm-hmm. If I do a voluntary event, I've noticed the difference of attitudes towards the way you're treated compared to a paid event, the way the audience kind of respects it and treats it as well. So it's across the board. You get this kind of thing. So you are doing YouTube, you're doing podcasting, you've got your business. This is fantastic. And everything you're doing is very much focused around the craft of vocals, spoken word, video, and, as I say, story, the whole point of story. But you do a couple of interesting podcasts. I'm going to put you on the spot, though.
Yeah.
Between all your wee projects, what's your favourite?
So currently, honestly, my favorite one is this podcast I launched back in September, which is called Putting It Together. And when I explain it, you're going to say that is the most niche thing in the entire world, because it is. It is a podcast where I'm going to go through all of composer Stephen Sondheim's entire body of work. For those of you who don't know that name, which I don't blame you, he's a Broadway composer. Started with West Side Story. That's probably the big one that people know about. And he's still alive today, still working. But I'm going through his entire body of work, show by show, song by song. So we just finished West Side Story. We started on Gypsy, which was his second show. And I have gotten the biggest response out of that show than anything I've ever done, because the people who are obsessed with him are finding it and then be like, this is what I've been looking for my entire life. And the reason I started that show is because I was one of them. I kept going to the podcast store on iTunes, searching Stephen Sondheim every few months, and like, someone's got to have made a show by now about him, right? And they never did. And I was like, fine, I'm going to do it myself, because I just want this thing to exist. I want to be able to talk to other people about this person who I've just got a lot of enjoyment and a lot of, life lessons from through song. So that is the one that I've been loving the most here recently.
You know what? I knew it. Even when I asked the question, I was like, I know the answer, but I just want to make sure. Couple of things you said there. Fantastic. It's like, one, how can nobody not know who he is? Mm-hmm. You know, I even know Sondheim. Good. What I didn't know is he's still alive and working. I honestly thought he was of an era that had maybe passed on.
Yeah, well, he's in his 90s now.
Oh, amazing.
But I mean, he still traveled. There's a version of one of his shows called Company. There was a new London production where they actually swapped genders of all the roles. But I was on in London's West End, and he flew there, was there on opening night, and then came back to New York afterwards. So he's still moving around and doing his his thing.
That is fantastic. So, putting it together, was that?
Yes.
So, that is your favourite project.
Yeah, right now it is. Yeah.
And how many episodes are you in?
I think 19 have been released so far.
And that's all West Side Story?
No, 16 of those were West Side Story. 3 of them were Gypsy.
3 of them are Gypsy. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
16 episodes on West Side Story.
I
That's
know,
pretty
right?
phenomenal.
We're going like really deep diving
Yeah.
here. I think that the cool thing, I mean, to tie it to what we're actually discussing here, which is story, the thing that is fascinating about Stephen Sondheim, one of the things that he brings up in most interviews that he's interviewed in, is that he is the most concerned about character. And what's really been eye-opening to me, as much as he's been a part of my life and as much as I've loved his lyrics over the years, doing this deeper dive where we're discussing it and there's guests on and we're unpacking these different things, is that it's so true. Like, he writes songs that fit the character that's singing them. And the songs he's most critical of himself that he's written are the ones he's like, they shouldn't have said that. That word is probably not something that character would actually say. This is a forced rhyme. Like, he gets in, like, he was very brutal on himself and self-critical. But I think his best songs are like, A, they fit the character. B, they tell a really interesting story in this song with the music and the lyrics kind of combined together. Yeah, I can kind of go on and on about it, but it's just a fascinating way to think of storytelling, but storytelling through a song instead of like, I'm telling you a story here right now.
Yeah, I love it. No, just when you were talking there, for all the listeners, you can probably hear it in his voice, but Kyle is a very relaxed gentleman. The times I've met him, he's very relaxed. He's got a poise about him. He became animated and puppet-like there. It was beautiful to watch.
Yeah.
He was just, this man was bubbling with passion there and movement. And I'm now going to stick to this subject a wee bit because I like the fact that this is something that you're so passionate about. And the whole point of this is for me learning as well. You know, I'm going to learn some new stuff. And I like the fact of what you said there about the characters, because characters are a huge part of story. And I loved your expression, he's telling a story through song, because people forget that every area of this world is a story. Even when we talk to people, we're telling stories. But I'm a great believer and I love stories in song. I get very passionate about that as well. I like musicals. I'm a big gruff Scotsman, but I love musicals. I've always been passionate about them. I find them a very entertaining watch, whether it's on a movie format or live stage. Obviously, live stage being the preference, but it's not always physically possible with finances, etc. They're very expensive if you've ever gone to the West End of London. But I love that. You know, even in our modern music today, well, not so much modern music. Forget that last comment, folks. Let's go back a wee bit in music, but they always created a story within that song. Musicals did it, but a lot of the old bands did it, and that's something that I thoroughly enjoy. But Sondheim, you're obviously very, very passionate about his music.
Yeah.
You're obviously very knowledgeable about him. Can I intrude to ask when this began?
You can intrude. So it really started, even though I was listening to musicals. Let me back up a bit. Grade 5. So it was grade 5, and my music teacher brought in as a lesson, says, we're going to listen to this musical in class. It was not a Sondheim show, I should point out. But we're going to listen to this musical in class and just kind of talk about it and use it to understand musical styles. Now, that show was Joseph and the Technicolor Dreamcoat, which is an Andrew Lloyd Webber show, which, looking back now as an adult, it's not the greatest show, but it informed me a lot. I fell in love with it because it was like these different styles. Like in that show, they use like calypso and they use country music and they use like traditional Broadway musical stylings throughout the show. And it just opened up my mind, and I just became obsessed with Broadway after that. I mean, I'd been growing up on Disney anyway, so it wasn't like musicals were foreign concepts to me. But I just really got into it. So then I was like getting West Side Story and Phantom of the Opera and My Fair Lady and like all these other like shows and stuff. So in like junior high and high school, I was not really listening much to like the popular music of the day. I was a little bit, but what I was really collecting was Broadway cast albums. That was really what my music was of my formative years. So while other people were listening to like Green Day and Smashing Pumpkins and Nirvana, that's the age I am, that was what was popular at the time, it was me rocking out to Les Mis. That was what was really like the thing. So in high school, I actually joined something called Theater Club. And Theater Club was not actually performing theater. Theater Club was us getting into our little van in my small town, and we would drive to Edmonton to attend the Citadel Theater, and we would go watch 4 to 5 performances each year. Now, one of those performances was a show called Into the Woods. That is a Sondheim show. And what was great is that before that show started, we got to sit down and have a little class, and we got to meet some of the actors that were going to be in the performance. And they talked about Stephen Sondheim and why he was so important in theater, but also why most theater actors love it when they can perform in a Sondheim show. Why? Because he writes for characters. So they don't have to just sit there and sing. They're singing and they're emoting and they're moving, and there's a purpose behind what they're saying each line. So they love it. And in Into the Woods specifically, what's really cool is the leitmotifs that he uses. So these little snippets of songs that are used at the beginning for like happy moments and stuff turn very troubled and sad in the second half of that show. It's the same melody, but now it's being played underneath a very different set of emotions. So he's playing with your emotions, and he's also using like melodies forwards and backwards in very interesting ways throughout that entire show. Anyways, I loved the show so much. It was a great production of that musical that then I was just obsessed. So I went and started collecting every single one of his shows and started building up my repertoire. I'm like, man, this is so good. And I will say, as a teenager, and even up to today, it's happened almost every single time. I don't think that necessarily every show he's written is brilliant. I do think that there's a brilliant song in every one of his shows, though. But most of the shows that I love the most from him, I started off when I first listened to them by being, I don't know if I like this, to being like, oh, I do like this, to I love this. There's these really interesting things that are happening, and it's not something that you maybe necessarily immediately love, but I grew to understand what he's doing with his music and his lyrics.
Wow. Sorry, as you're talking, you can see
you're researching.
I'm researching. I'm actually doing something I've never done before because I'm so like blown away by this. That's too confusing. It'll confuse me. I can ask you. I don't even need to research. Into the Woods. I didn't even realize.
Yeah, he did Into the Woods.
Okay, so you obviously have a great knowledge of Sondheim. Come on, give me his list of
shows. There's the ones that most people are going to know about. So West Side Story, he wrote lyrics for, did not write the music for.
Okay.
A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum is Stephen Sondheim. He wrote music and lyrics. The big heavy hitters, Company is one that some people might have heard of. Again, it's been remade in the West End just recently, so maybe people are seeing it online. You'll know the song Send in the Clowns. That's from a show called A Little Night Music. The show is not as popular as what that song became. But we know Into the Woods, Sweeney Todd. I'm trying to think of the other big popular one that I'm forgetting of right now. But there's Follies, Pacific Overtures.
Easy. Well, you've actually hit a couple. Okay, that I love. Sweeney Todd is one of my favorite all time.
In many ways, even though because Into the Woods is so a part of me, I do, looking at his entire body work, Sweeney Todd is probably his masterpiece. I'm going to say probably just from start to finish. If you listen to that score, it's pretty phenomenal.
I mean, so how do you think, I'm going to throw a kind of weird random thing here. How do you think he feels about the movie adaptations?
Well, it's interesting you ask that because he is a huge movie buff. Like if you talk to him, like he knows a lot about film. Granted, when he was like in his 20s and 30s loving film, we're talking about like French New Wave and like all the heavy hitters and stuff like that. He's pretty upfront with that. I think he likes his movie adaptations, save for one where he says it should never have been adapted, which was A Little Night Music, because Send in the Clowns was so popular. That's probably why it was made into a movie. But he said it doesn't work as a movie. It works as a stage play. It does not work as a movie.
Yeah. Okay.
Which is interesting that he says that. It's hard to say. Like, I don't know if he'd ever come out and say like, I love this or hate this sort of thing. I have my own impressions of the movies that have been made from his work.
Please.
I think West Side Story, the movie, is phenomenal. I really do. I recently rewatched it because of the season on West Side Story that we did. I think it's great.
Well, I mean, most people, certainly even myself, I've never seen it live on stage. My only experience is the movie, and I love it. I mean, I'm not going to deny that. I think it's a really powerful, fun, entertaining movie. And I think on live stage, it would equal it, if not be far superior, of course.
Right.
But, you know, I can understand because a lot of people will only get these experiences as movies.
Yeah, and it's true. And Sweeney Todd was, I think, an interesting, I'm not going to call it failure. I think that's a little bit too harsh on it. It didn't fully work for me. I actually like lots of it. I love parts of that movie a whole lot. I think that they realize it very well. The issue I have actually with Sweeney Todd is not what most people think, which is Johnny Depp. I think Johnny Depp actually plays a pretty effective Sweeney Todd.
I agree.
My actual issue is with Helena Bonham Carter, who is usually an actress I really like, but I think was directed improperly because that character is supposed to be way funnier than what she actually is in the movie. Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed Sweeney Todd. It's actually one of my favorite kind of movies of that kind of genre. I really liked Johnny Depp in it, and people know my view on Johnny Depp of late.
Yeah,
if you've listened, I mean, you know, I'm sorry, that guy, we'll get onto that maybe. Helena Bonham Carter, I thought was okay, but now that you say that,
Yeah, if you look at the source material, it's different. Did you actually know who originated that role on Broadway?
It was
Angela Lansbury.
Lansbury, yes, that was it.
Which I know most people now think of her as Murder, She Wrote.
Yes.
But yes, is like the sadistic
and
murderer
I remember
in that movie.
seeing, because there was a filmed version of it as well.
Yeah, of the stage show.
And I remember watching it and I was blown away because I was like, this is her.
Yeah.
And it was pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, so you see her performance and it's like silly and over the top, but then it turns very like sick and disgusting by the end of it. Fun fact about that, she actually, because in the stage show, they're actually real dough that they're working with when they're making pies. So there's flour flying up in the air. So she had to learn how to sing while flour was hitting up into her like vocal cords.
Oh,
and
wow,
stuff like
that's difficult.
So she practiced for 3 months, like in her kitchen, singing while flour was like wafting into her face and knowing how to actually sing properly.
That's brilliant. See, that's dedication.
Yeah,
I like that. Yeah, but of course, you say Helena Bonham Carter, but the problem is, it was a Tim Burton.
Yeah, so she had to be in there.
Well, it's like Tim Burton. I remember seeing one of those memes, and it was kind of like it was a face of Tim Burton, and there was a very shocked-looking Depp and Bonham Carter, and the expression was Tim Burton was saying, "What do you mean? There's other actors out there?"
I thought the most meta thing that could ever happen is that he should make a movie where Johnny Depp plays Helena Bonham Carter and Helena Bonham Carter plays Johnny Depp, just to make it go full circle.
Well, that's one for the other repodcast.
Repodcasting.
Yes, that's one. There you go. There's a bit of a hint. We want you to do that one, okay?
Yeah.
We want you to recast in a reverse role. Into the Woods, though. I've got to be honest. I wasn't a great fan of. I enjoy it. But I didn't enjoy it.
The movie is not a good representation of what that show is.
Johnny Depp.
Oh, what a bad sequence that is. Again, it's one of those things where, again, there's things you can do on stage that people are like, yeah, sure, whatever. This is a stage show. I can suspend my disbelief with this. But that if you do it in a movie, is really hard to pull off well, and that is one of those. Like the wolf in that movie is like woof, like not very good.
It's creepy. It's not creepy in the way of I was freaked out. It's creepy as in the way my skin crawled with horror and cringeworthiness and kind of like this is so wrong. It's been represented wrong. It's coming across wrong. It's
also my issue too is that I think that movie was filmed in this style that I've increasingly become really weary of and really don't like, which I call the Disney live action filter that they put on things.
Yeah.
And I just do not like it. Like I just don't like it. It's almost too dark from the beginning. Like really how Into the Woods works well is that the first part is your happily ever after story, and then it subverts itself in the second act, where everything turns to crap. And we realize, you don't actually live happily ever after. You actually have to work at it. Or there's deaths that happen, or people want to get divorced, or there's all this other stuff that happens after that. So that's the cool thing that gets juxtaposed that way. One of my favorite lines, which again landed on me as a teen, like as a pile of bricks, but I don't think is hit as hard in the movie, which is too bad because, oh my goodness, the person who plays the baker's wife, Emily Blunt. Emily Blunt is phenomenal. I think she's a phenomenal actress. And she's given this line, but it doesn't hold as much weight because of how they film it in the movie. But they talk about moments. There's this idea about moments inside of Into the Woods a lot. And really what they're talking about there is life moments, right? You remember these certain things in your life because they hold really value to you, whether it was really funny, really sad, really emotional, just really happy. Like those are the moments that you piece together and you remember. But she sings in the second half, like, I wish that my life were only moments, even then and now a bad one. But then she goes, but if life were only moments, then you would never know you had one. And it sounds a little pat when you say it like that, but I love that idea because, yes, we all want to have like these great times all the time, but no, then it would lose all meaning. Sometimes you have to have those fallow periods, or sometimes you have to live in a little bit of sadness so that when the happy moments come, it has a lot more weight behind it.
Yeah, perfect. That's lovely. So, oh, excuse me. What we're going to do is we're going to pause again for a moment and let some air into this. Okay, so we're just having our wee quick couple of minutes to breathe, grab some water, and we started a conversation there, which, you know what, it's the sort of thing we should be recording. And again, Kyle throws out this epic Sondheim knowledge. And could you just kind of go back over what you were talking about a wee bit there? Just to even summarize it for everyone.
Okay, so what I was mentioning is that what I find really fascinating is that we're talking about Into the Woods, but the show that followed after that is something that's lesser known. It's called Assassins, is the next show that he followed that up with. And it's a show that is actually all the main characters are would-be or successful assassins of U.S. presidents, which is kind of a very subversive show. I mean, it starts off with a song that basically says, like, everyone has a right to their freedom or their sunshine, which is basically what they love doing in the world is shooting people and shooting presidents. So it's like really a challenging piece of work. He's actually come out and said that it's the one show that he would not change a single thing inside of, is Assassins. Everything else, he always finds something that he wish he could have changed or would change going forward. But Assassins, like, it's a perfect show for me that I've written. It's like, you know. But what I was saying is that with one of the performances, there was a revival of it that didn't do so well because it premiered the same month as what 9/11 happened with. So people were not really in the mood to be challenged or to really think critically of bad events inside of history. But I just find it very interesting that the same man can write a show that's all about hope, which is what Into the Woods really is, and then write a show right after that that is all about not having hope.
Well, I mean, that's it. The problem is entertainment to a lot of people is it's light. They want the hope. They don't want the darkness. And it kind of infuriates me a wee bit because let's look at other kind of concepts. You know, Disney. We've mentioned Disney. And Disney I can see them becoming a big problem. You know, we all have enjoyed Disney, grew up in Disney. You know, I remember all the cartoons, Alice in Wonderland, Little Mermaid, stuff like that. And now they're, as you say, they're doing live action shows. They're kind of getting back into that, and or should I say, they're remaking
all their own movies,
as live action. But now they've also picked up Star Wars and Marvel, and I've certainly noticed a difference in some of those sort of movies are also getting lighter. Don't know if you're a fan of any of that stuff.
Well, I'm a big Marvel fan. I grew up reading a bunch of comic books and stuff like that. So for me, they are my like tall tales and urban legends and all that stuff when I was growing up. I never thought I would get this in my lifetime, to be honest. So I'm still on the ride.
Yeah.
I think that by and large, Marvel does a pretty good job with their properties.
I agree.
There's been some misses. I'm not going to say like every one of them is brilliant, but I've liked them far more of them than I've hated them.
Yeah, I agree. Marvel to me are doing a great job. Their comics have always been great. I love the fact that they adapted so many of the myths and legends of our times into these fantastical storylines. You know, I give credit to Kubrick and Stanley and all those guys that actually did all this stuff. I love it, and the movies I am thoroughly enjoying as well. To be honest, you know, the stories are great. They're trying to keep it true. But since Disney took over, which was now a couple of years back,
yeah, I'm gonna say 5 or 6. When
is it that long?
Yeah,
I've noticed a slight adjustment to some of the tone. Let's just take, you know, the most recent couple, Civil War, for example. In the movie, the comic books is a really bloody dark episode, ending with, if you haven't read them, I'm going to give you a spoiler. Total spoiler here. Cap gets shot in the head.
Yeah. And I honestly thought that, I was wondering if they would go that far.
I was hoping. Not out of nastiness, but just because it was powerful.
Yeah. When a comic ends with the death of one of your main characters in your line, it's pretty bold.
Yeah, but I also feel Infinity Stone.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I kind of watched it.
Yeah.
And there was a couple of moments you were like, oh, but I honestly didn't get any real strong emotional impact from that movie.
Right.
There was nothing. It was almost like, okay, here's a really dark subject. Here is a tyrant. Here is the ultimate evil. So, you know, put that in all the mythology, here is the ultimate adversary that the hero journey, they are going on to defeat. The problem was the hero journey has kind of already happened.
Exactly, right.
And this movie was the kind of climactic battle, so to speak. The problem with that is you can't just have a movie which is a climactic battle. You still need story. You still need character association.
Well, I will give props to Infinity War of, which I was not expecting going into that movie, was that I was not expecting it to end with the evil person winning, like quote unquote winning. It's like, oh, that's an interesting choice. I mean, he's going to not win in the next movie. I get that. But still, to end the movie was just like, I won.
That was good. And I agree. But at the same time, did you actually walk out? I've walked out of movies in the past where I've just been like, if they've done it right, you're like, oh my God. Oh, well,
right,
you have that emotional kind of thing inside you. The story, the characters, everything's impacted you enough that you're like, that was powerful. I walked out of the cinema after Infinity War going, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
There was something lacking. And I fear it's the Disney starting to take control. That, okay, but the tyrant wins. But there wasn't necessarily anything overly dark or bad throughout the whole thing. Yeah, there was a couple of deaths. There was a couple of this, but I felt it was lacking power. It was lacking. There was a bit of the story, and I do personally feel it's because the problem is we've had this big epic journey up to it, and now they've created a movie which is almost the end of the journey. But the problem is there wasn't enough of the journey in this story. There wasn't enough.
Right. Yeah.
There wasn't enough context. It was literally just about the great battle, which meant you had kind of forgotten, you know, because of the span of the movies, you've forgotten some of the stuff that's come before, which means you're losing impact.
Yeah.
And I feel this is, you know, going back to the original concept, this is the fear I'm having. You know, Sondheim created dark and light. He wanted to emphasize this, and you're saying he did this great, and he created this Assassins. What was it called? It was Assassins. Yeah. Just double check. He created that, which frankly is a ridiculously powerful sounding piece. I mean, it sounds great, done with darkness and a light-hearted tone at times, I presume, and a kind of shocking piece that will get you thinking. But the problem is what we're having now is we're forgetting a lot of people aren't willing to embrace any of that darkness in any kind of media form. They're always looking for light, and Disney, you know, between the Star Wars franchise and the Marvel, you know, there's two powerful kind of things that are going to influence us culturally. The young generations, I see it. You know, Star Wars has come back, Marvel's come back, great storylines for them both. You know, Lucas used the hero of 1,000 faces to write Star Wars. But now we've got Disney kind of dumbing them, kind of taking away that real... I mean, are you a Star Wars fan?
I am. I mean, I was never... Like, I watched the movies and stuff. I was never a diehard Star Wars fan. But I enjoyed the movies when I was growing up. Yeah.
Right. I mean, well, for example, you first see Darth Vader, and you get the feeling. You as a young kid, I was like, oh, and my brother, the swine, used to lie in bed going, scaring me when I was a wee boy. So I remember having that when Han Solo gets frozen in carbonite. It was like at that age, you're like, oh, your hero has just been. But we're not getting that anymore. It's like those classic moments, I feel, they're getting dumbed down by the culture. People aren't wanting that. And this is why I respect guys like Sondheim who are, I didn't know about Assassins. You've now told me, and I'm thinking, that is a fantastic, because there is, he's showing darkness. He's being risky, but he's putting it with elements of humor and light and trying to balance it, but it's still showing a reality that people don't want.
Yeah.
And I think this is where we are as a culture in storytelling, and everything. We're losing this. We're losing those elements because too much is wanting to be fluffed up. I'll use that expression. I mean, continue with some more Sondheim. I've gone in one of my tangents. This is what I do.
No.
I actually don't know if there's even a point to that. There probably was, but the problem is if you have listened to these podcasts, which I know a lot of people have, that happens a lot. I'll start a conversation and forget where I was going.
Well, I think what the issue is, I mean, just to put a button on that conversation, I think it still happens. I'm not one of those people who just like hates everything in modern society, but what I think in the early 90s, mid 90s, what I thought Disney was actually doing very well was that they were showing kids that there can be awfulness, but then bring the hope back in the second half. I mean, I still remember watching the original Lion King in theaters and being like, wait, they just killed off his dad? Like, what's going on in this movie? And they weren't afraid to go that far.
Yeah.
I'm sure their live action will do the same thing, but my issue with their live action ones is that they're not trying anything different. It's like, we're just going to do a retelling of the same story we just saw. So why do that? Right?
Is that not what's happening? They're just remaking everything. It's crazy. It's crazy.
I'd rather see newer stories that are kind of trying to push that envelope forward, because I do think in a way that people are more sophisticated nowadays than they ever were, because they have access to everything, right? If I want to watch that movie, well, great. In 5 seconds, I can probably be seeing it on my phone if I really wanted to, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we understand that. We've seen all these stories, so we need to try and push the envelope in different ways. I don't know what that is necessarily. One other thing I will say, being a Marvel fan, what I always loved about Marvel Comics is that there was both the Norse gods and the Greek gods all existed in the same universe.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite characters that they played around with, especially in the 2000s, was Hercules. Hercules is this character that exists in the Marvel franchise and was an Avenger at one point in the comic books. But they paired him up with this new character called Amadeus Cho. Who I'm a huge fan of the character Amadeus Cho.
Yep.
And for people who don't know, he is like quote unquote a superhero, but this is his superpower. He's usually a teenage boy, an Asian teenage boy, who is so smart. So he constantly has to eat to feed his brain, is basically what it is. He's a skinny kid, but he has to constantly eat so that his brain can actually function. He's so smart that if like you threw a cup right at me, he would know. He'd be able to calculate almost instantly, oh, if I stand here, it'll bounce off here, go back and smash that guy in the face. So he's able to calculate, or if I move my umbrella this way or whatever I have to do, he's able to calculate that super quick and just do that and defeat them that way. So that's his superpower, is him being really smart. It's really
Fantastic.
what it is. I want that character to exist in the movies. I just want to see that realized. I want to see a meeting of Thor and Hercules and being like, wait a second, how does this exist in the same thing?
Yeah, that's actually interesting. Now, Amadeus Cho, though, just completely going off tangent, did he not take on a persona of the Hulk at one point
He
as
did,
well?
yes. Yeah, he did.
Yeah.
He became the Hulk at some point, I think, which I wasn't reading at that point, but yes, I believe that he did eventually become the Hulk.
These weird crossovers that they do. Yeah, I mean, that's one thing about the Marvel stuff. You know, they did Hercules, Thor. They had there was a couple other ones. Gosh, I'm trying to rack my brains. I mean, it's even the names of people. Thanos is oh gosh, there's something about Thanos. It's coming. It's something to do with death.
Oh,
the realm of death, something like that. Please don't correct me on this, folks. I'm pulling it. It's in one of the mythologies. So a lot of the names they've even used have very interesting meaning. In the mythology, you know, they're all there. So I got to respect them, you know, Marvel for that. They actually took this whole kind of line. I was speaking to a young lad at an event, and he was a Marvel fan, but because of Marvel, he'd got into the old myths and legends, and he was hitting me with stuff, and I was going, yeah, but I'm looking at this wee bairn. I mean, this tiny wee laddie looking at it, telling me all this fact and quotes and information about mythology, and I'm going, wow. And this was all from the back of Marvel.
Well, that would there was a Disney TV show that I was obsessed with in my like tween and teenagerhood. Do you recall a show that was called Gargoyles at all?
Yes. Was that not a spin-off from the Hunchback?
I don't think it was.
No,
it was not a spin-off.
Am I on the wrong one?
Yeah, it was pretty dark, I would say, for like a Disney TV show. The conceit was that the gargoyles turned to stone in daylight, and then they kind of became real life things in the darkness or at nighttime. And then through shenanigans and a curse and stuff, they are put to sleep in ancient England and then come awake at like modern day New York City. Yeah, those pictures right there on the right-hand side.
Yes, I remember it. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, folks, just looking up to check that we're in the same vein here.
Why I bring that up is that it starts off as kind of your standard like fantasy sci-fi thing in the first little bit, but then in later storylines, they bring in a bunch of Shakespeare references, a bunch of the fairy tales like Puck and Oberon and all those people actually show up as characters in the show. There's this whole time traveling element, so they kind of go around and meet like Macbeth and literally all of these Shakespeare characters. But then near the end of the show, they also bring in some of the Norse people. So there's like this big storyline where they have to go and retrieve the Eye of Odin, which is this gemstone. But Odin, it's actually Odin's eye that they have to do. So this obsessed me. That's actually was coming just at the time as I was also getting into Shakespeare in school. So it was like I was making references back and forth. And probably part of the reason why I still love Shakespeare today was because of that show specifically.
Yep. No, I'd forgotten about that, and I just, again, checked it on my laptop, and as soon as I see the images, I'm like, yeah, I watched this. Yeah. I watched this. Yeah, I was thinking, I remember there was a spin-off, and actually, now that I say it, it was more recent. It was to do with the Hunchback of Notre Dame movie, and they had the gargoyles.
Absolutely.
And they kind of brought a wee spin-off of that, I think, out as well. But this one was dark, it was fun, and I absolutely remember it when I'm looking at these images.
And if you are a fan of Star Trek The Next Generation, almost every cast member has a voice in that at some point.
Really?
Yeah. I think except for Patrick Stewart is the only one who didn't, but everyone else.
The voice itself.
Literally,
I mean, the man with the voice didn't have it.
Everybody else does.
That's pretty cool. That is pretty epic. You have a very good brain of, you know.
all these weird connections.
Yeah, I like that. I like that.
Which gets me into trouble now because I'm now at an age where I'll make a reference or say something. I'm like, you would have no idea what I'm talking about, 22-year-old person that was not alive when this was even out.
It gets worse. Yeah. May I ask what age you are, Kyle?
I'm going to be turning 36 in July.
36. Yeah, but I'm 42 in 3 days.
Sure.
Or 2 days. Wait a minute. 2 days. Yeah, there you go, folks. By the time this episode's out, I'll probably be 42. I sympathize with that because it gets worse the older you get. Mm-hmm. And it's not a patronizing thing. But it's just you realize that the cultures are becoming so... Like, when I was growing up, there wasn't too much of a gap. Right. Like, I reckon, you know, our age, 8 years... 6 years, sorry. 6 years. Yeah, storyteller, not mathematician. You know, we've got 6 years, but I could probably guarantee we have very similar culture, other than the Canadian-Scottish divide. Sure, yeah. But we have, you know, references, media, MTV, all that stuff. Stuff that a lot of people wouldn't get anymore. Like MTV when I was growing up was filled with extreme weird sports stuff. Beavis and Butthead was on that as well.
They actually played music videos on there.
Yeah, music, you know, I don't know. I've mentioned Brett a few times. Brett is Krista, my fiance's disabled brother, and he comes over, and we used to put on things like country music television for him. He loved it. That's one of his things. He loves country music television. They don't play any music on that.
I know, isn't it so weird?
It's like what? And it's like the same with so many of these channels. MTV, I believe, kind of went the same as well. But it was like I grew up in that generation, and you mentioned bands like Smashing Pumpkins and all those earlier.
Right.
That was my music. I listened to all that stuff growing up. So I know we'll be in the same generational band. But now you talk to someone like 10 years later, younger than us, and they're just like...
Just don't know. I mean, because there was a fracturing at that point, right? In the mid-90s is really when, like, cable and satellite started becoming more prevalent to more people, right?
Yeah.
I grew up on a farm. I had 3 channels
Mm-hmm.
growing up until I think I was 17, and we finally got a satellite dish. I say 3 channels. One of them was the CBC. One of them was a station out of Calgary, and then one of them was a station out of Edmonton. And those 2 stations basically played the same thing, except for some interesting differences here and there. But by and large, like 2 to 3 stations was all I had growing up. So everyone kind of was on the same page, right? Going to school, everyone was kind of in the same boat. We had 3 channels. That's about it that we get to experience from. So I think everyone had those same things, which is probably why, like, because my parents showed us a lot of like their favorite movies and like whatever the movie of the week was, or whatever the was playing on The Wonderful World of Disney on Sunday nights. Like everyone was kind of watching the same thing, so everyone had the same references. Why I love old comedy, like I love the Marx Brothers and Carol Burnett and the Rat Pack and all that kind of stuff, because it was playing and my parents would show it to me.
Yeah.
Mel Brooks, Monty Python, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Just like that's what formed my life. And now there is not just like hundreds of channels for TV, but there's also YouTube and Instagram and all these other things online. That's like no one can possibly have the same references anymore. Everyone's kind of all in their same little bubbles. And so if you find someone that's like, oh, you know this thing that I like? Great, cool, let's be friends.
Yeah.
But that is like 1% of the population and no one else knows what the heck you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm the same. In the UK, we originally had, I think it was 3 channels. We went to Channel 4, which was the cool and avant-garde, and it had all the kind of crazy stuff on. And then eventually, later on, Channel 5 came. Now, that's your basic kind of public channels over there. And that was definitely into my early teenage years that even Channel 4 kicked in to Channel 5. We then got Sky TV, which was a kind of form of cable. But it was all sports and stuff like that, you know, with MTV was the one exception.
Right.
But you're right. I mean, it's like my kind of gaining of knowledge was, okay, here we go. Blockbuster.
Yeah, right. You go to Blockbuster and find your videos, right?
How much of a highlight, how much of an event and fun was going down to a place like we had a lot of independent video shops before that. But the highlight was going down to Blockbuster. And as I'm saying this, going through my head is, we even had, at the time, newsagents quite often had a little video department where you could get VHS or Betamax.
Yeah. I had a Betamax player.
Oh, yeah. One of my friends did. We had VHS. Created a feud. It was a blood feud between VHS and Betamax.
To this day, and my whole family agrees, I think that Betamax was the superior format. I love it.
Why?
I think, well, it doesn't work very well in a capitalistic society, but I think their products lasted longer. Like the tape, I think, was rated for longer use. We had a Betamax player that lasted us for like 25 years. I could still play them. It was fine. Like totally cool. And we still watch old like family videos by plugging that into the TV. But
they got pushed out first, if I remember. Betamax disappeared off the market.
And quicker. You know why? This is the thing. You'll know that a format will stay as soon as pornography adopts it. And that's what happened. They took VHS over Betamax.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that. And actually, here's an interesting fact that I just discovered yesterday. Apparently, the UK is about to ban all pornography online.
Well, good luck.
They're actually, I don't know how they're doing it, but it's like the government thing. There's actually something being done where it's going to actually be banned, so you can't access it anywhere.
There's going to be lawlessness in the UK.
I do not know. Well, what's really funny is apparently, this was an article in the newspaper I was reading yesterday. I was sitting waiting on something, and apparently they, I can't believe I'm speaking about this. This is why I love these random chats. Is that the pornography usage in the UK has spiked to an all-time high.
Get it now
before it gets banned. Now, I don't know how they're going to ban it.
Yeah.
I don't know, but apparently it's going to be just effectively they're going to shut off all access. Like they're going to shut down, do something. I don't know the technical
stuff.
We'll see how that
goes. Yeah.
They're going to try and do something. So that's going to be interesting. But no, that's fantastic. So VHS took on porn.
Yeah.
That's how it spiked. Amazing.
But I mean, that's why home video became successful because they took that format. Same thing with movies in the early 1910s and 20s. Like that's the first thing that people started videotaping when they could get that technology. Before the censors and stuff kind of came and tried to clean it up as much as possible.
Aren't we a great race?
The internet, same thing. Like that's why it took off, because people can now post pictures online.
Yeah, aren't we just the wonderful people? Here we have some of the most amazing technology known
just a
to
bunch
man.
of stupid apes.
We're evolving. It's evolving, and what do? Boobs.
Yeah,
That's it.
What
It's
it
just
is.
all about
It's
boobs.
Yeah.
I'm trying to. That's the politest thing I can say. Thank you. That's. I love this. This is why the Bothy Storytelling Podcast is so random now, folks, because we've just gone from Sondheim to Disney to porn. This is exactly what I love, and this is why I want to do more of these chats, because I want them to be open and just talk about. Thankfully, we haven't gone into politics.
Right. Yeah.
Right. We're not going there because that's...
I'm not going to actually go into politics, but I intentionally don't speak about politics on all of my stuff. And even if I tangentially talk about it, I've been showing some comments online on my Instagram feed here recently. Even if I just even briefly mention a politician's name, comments right away.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's like either pro, against. It's like I wasn't even talking about that. That's not what this thing is even about. But.
Do you know, that's actually really funny. There's two things I'm going to just, without going into them. One, comments, I did see that. I was actually looking at something to do with a dog walking thing, and it was somewhere had banned a certain thing. What it was New York has banned animals in the subway unless they're in a bag. So somebody had posted this, and it was fantastic because the New Yorkers, being New Yorkers, they come up with ideas. They had basically cut out IKEA bags and put the dog. So the dog's walking. It was like a Rottweiler in an IKEA bag, but because it was in a bag, technically it fell. And of course, it was a funny sort of like post. And then all the comments were just all political rants.
Oh my gosh. There's an actual theory out there, is that if you get a long comment thread, eventually you're going to get someone talking about Nazis. Like, if your comment section goes past like 50 responses, just scroll down. It could be something like, "Oh, I love this beautiful flower," and then scroll. "I hate the Nazis," or like, it's like, "How dare you bring this person? You're a Nazi." Every time.
But this
is
what happened. Literally, it was this cute thing about New Yorkers defying the law in a fun way, but it turned into this political rant. But then on going back to our previous conversation, have you looked at the Meetup app lately?
Not recently, no.
Oh my goodness. It has hit a big problem.
Oh, really?
I keep getting all these comments on it. And this is, if you're not familiar with this, folks, this is an app. This is actually how I ended up meeting Kyle. When I say meet up and meeting Kyle, I need to emphasize it's not a dating app, okay? Because every time I mention Meetup, it's like, oh God, people are going to think this is some dirty dating app.
No, in the business world, meetup.com is actually really popular to like host things and that sort of stuff.
Well, this is how I met the guys in the podcasting group and Kyle, etc., because the Meetup app does post all these events for entrepreneurs. Now, lately, all the groups I'm members of, I keep getting a post, "Oh, such and such has started a conversation thread." I click on it. And it's one of those pictures with a half scantily clad woman with one of the banners across her, such and such for sex, and then a seductive comment and a link. And I don't know if they've been hacked.
Maybe, yeah.
I don't know if it's users, but it's all. If you come across them, you'll notice the images always change. Banner position's exactly the same, so it looks like it's all the same group.
Oh boy!
So there you go. Porn has even hit Meetup.
Oh man, we can't have nice things.
This is why we're not allowed to have nice things. It's just the way the world is. So let's try and get back to a semblance of sanity. But why do we need to? MediaLabs, putting it together.
Yeah.
What are your other podcasts and projects?
So the other big one, like I do a show called Creative Block, where I talk with artists and creative entrepreneurs, and it was a way really to kind of do one-on-one networking a little bit for me, and also just meet people here in the city and having a lot of fun with that. It's actually two kind of things have happened that I wasn't necessarily going into it with the idea of, but I've become much more in tune with the music industry here in Calgary, which is fun.
Cool.
And I'm meeting a lot more restaurateurs, so people who own restaurants, that I'm going to be going and doing some interviews with too. So hopefully free food. That's fingers crossed.
Oh, excellent. Yeah.
But yeah, that was not my intention. But I was like, oh, that'd be some cool people to talk to. So yeah, if you want to hear long form interviews with artists and creative entrepreneurs, that is what you can do with Creative Block. The other big one that we do, or that I do, is called Assumptions. I have a co-host with that, Daniel Melville Jones, a friend of mine. He is a very devout Christian. I am a described atheist. So we sit down and just have conversations about a worldview without yelling at each other, which has been very, very fun, and have gotten great responses from both sides of the aisle. Although I always joke, both sides always think that the other side, you're doing too easy on the other side. You can never make anyone super happy. We do that in season, so we're actually on a break right now. But coming up with ideas for what season 3 is going to be when we kind of come back to it here in a couple months.
Excellent. And I've met Daniel.
Yeah.
Absolute gentleman of a guy, really nice, pleasant guy, and was very excited to find out we're both getting married in the same month.
Yeah, I know.
Not together, though.
No,
not
again,
as,
very clear.
Because that wouldn't work. But no, he's a great guy. So having met him and listened to the podcast, I get how that works so well, because he's so eloquent, he's so well spoken. He's a very smart guy. In fact, I think he's a bit too smart. I said that when I met him. I actually said, I don't like you because you're too smart for
right.
So Assumptions is a good one. And there was a YouTube channel you mentioned.
Oh, sorry, yeah,
well.
YouTube channel. The easiest way to do that, it breaks my heart because it's the only quote-unquote social media network that doesn't have the Kyle Marshall, which I am on everywhere else. So the easiest place to do that is youtube.com/Kyle Marshall Tries. But yeah, like I've recently kind of quote-unquote pivoted is the buzz term that you can use. And I'm only focusing on adaptations. I've always loved talking about books, movies, and it's my own thought process. But I thought to really nail it down, I wanted to do books, their movie adaptations, and which one I think is better at the end of the day.
Excellent. So you've got busy schedule, and now you're becoming a social icon, being out there interviewing people.
Yeah, exactly.
Fantastic.
Trying to rub my elbows with the elite. Yeah.
Right. So we kind of, as I say, we've chatted far and wide about many things, and this is the whole point of this. You've told me a bit about your story. I've kind of got some new insight into your story from even the Sondheim passion.
Right.
You've explained, how that came about. You've mentioned mythology, you've thrown in things, so you know stories. I'm not going to ask you to tell me a story. Don't panic. Although I should get them to tell me a story, because it will save me having to do it. But do you have a favourite story that you remember from growing up? I mean, is there... I don't want you to tell me, don't worry. So, I'm trying to emphasise, don't panic. I'm not going to... But is there something that, like a story that's always stuck with you, or a story that you know?
I guess I can take this anyway, but are you asking like a story from like a fictional place or like a real story?
You know what? Let's do both. Let's start with fictional.
Okay. When you say fictional, like there's just two things that immediately jump to mind. It always goes back to cartoons, I guess, for me, but there was this show called Teddy Ruxpin. And yes, there's like the Teddy Ruxpin doll, right? I love that show growing up because it was, again, all this like high drama, action, swashbuckling type of thing. Like that's what that whole show was about. And I loved it. There was basically always on a cliffhanger, so you always needed to see what would happen the next week. And to this day, I think it's great. It steals a lot from like all the recurring themes and stuff that happen in most like fantasy stories. But at the time, it's all new to you as a kid. So it definitely resonated with me. The other one is another kind of fantasy story, but it's The Princess Bride. The Princess Bride was like a killer for me when I was
It's the first book review I think I ever did for this podcast. It's The Princess Bride, you all know, is my favourite. So
yeah, it's a great movie, and I just recently here, because of the YouTube channel, because I'm going to do the review of the book and the movie of The Princess Bride, I read the book for the first time, and I love that too.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
I got it bought for me last Christmas, not the Christmas there. Beautiful one with some illustrations in it. And if you've never read The Princess Bride, it's phenomenal. Kyle will probably agree. Yeah. It's done in such a way that although you know the history is non-existent, he does this, depending on the version you've read, a foreword.
Yes.
That almost makes you think, is this all real?
Yeah.
How much of this is history?
He intentionally plays with that. It's like, is this actually real? It's like, no, it's not. None of it is. It's all made up. But yeah, the one that I have was the 40th anniversary edition, so there's 2 forwards in it. So he introduces it, then he has
Like Brooke.
yeah,
That's one I've got. Beautiful.
So it's really funny, him kind of going backwards. As far as a real story goes, my favorite real story, this happened in my teenagerhood, but when it was when my grandmother was still alive, she volunteered at the information place building in her small town of Innisfail, Alberta. Did it for many, many years. And this one day, these punk kids, these teenagers came in, and they started ripping up some of the brochures inside of the information desk. And she told them to stop, and like, can you just not do that and get out? And they kept doing it. So she put one of them into a chicken wing, if you know what that is in wrestling.
Yeah.
She took them into chicken and threw them out of the information booth. She was like 60-something at this point, might I add. So the 60-year-old woman throws a chicken wing on a teenager and throws them outside, which would get you arrested nowadays. I'm pretty confident.
Yeah, you can. Yeah. That's brilliant. So you're basically, your grandmother owned some kids that were being vandals. That's great.
She, I mean, grew up watching Stampede Wrestling here in Canada, so she probably knew the move. I was a big wrestling fan growing up and still kind of am nowadays. So I just love the fact that my grandmother threw on a wrestling move on a teenager kid.
Excellent.
Teach him not to be a punk.
I need to ask, Stampede Wrestling?
Yeah. You know what that is?
No.
Stampede Wrestling was owned by Stu Hart, which is the father of like Bret Hart,
the Hart family,
all the Hart
right?
family.
Okay.
Ran it here in Western Canada for years, for like decades.
Okay.
And then basically stopped existing once the WWF came and kind of basically bought out all their talent, and then they had to shut down afterwards.
Yeah, and I mentioned the WW.
Now, yeah.
Yeah, see, I grew up with it being the WWF until the pandas got really insulted.
Got really upset.
Yeah, because apparently you're not allowed to wrestle pandas anymore. It's a bad thing. But no, I mentioned this. I used to watch it. I grew up watching it. I loved wrestling, and we've got the cable now here, you know. And I noticed it was on, so I started trying to watch it again. I was just like, this is rubbish.
Sure.
And it's another kind of thing that I find interesting, and I know we're coming very close to finishing up here, so this is again us getting sidetracked. But from the story point of view, they were a great influence in stories for me
100%.
because the original writers for WWE, WWF really worked on storyline, character-based storyline.
Well, if you read a lot of the books, they don't do this anymore. They used to work backwards. So their biggest card of the year, back then would be WrestleMania. But they would say, this is what we need to have happen here. So let's work it backwards. What has to happen so that we can get that? Yes, crowds would influence that. So if someone was not getting over or something, they could change things on the fly. But basically, they had something set to work towards. And then now they're kind of working week to week and have maybe some like month-long plan, but they don't have anything like set.
Interesting.
So I think that's part of the issue. The weird thing I will say is I actually think if you look back at even 80s, early 90s, there's some exceptions to this. I agree. I think the storytelling was way better back then, but the actual in-ring wrestling was not as good as it is today.
Yeah.
Like, they can do some amazing things. I'm so far down the rabbit hole with this. I actually watch something called New Japan Pro Wrestling, which is over literally in Japan.
Okay.
And boy, it looks like they kick their heads in for real sometimes. It's some crazy stuff that they do over there.
So you're actually a big wrestling fan still to this day. So,
but I agree with you that storytelling in a ring environment, like, it's basically theater in the round, is what I tell people.
Soap opera,
right? It's a soap opera type of thing. But if you are invested in what has happened up until this point, they can play with your emotions very easily, especially if they're referencing something with a move that happened, a year ago or something like that. And there is drama on the line, right? I think there's just something satisfying too, like 1, 2, 3. There's just something that they figured out, like, that is satisfying to see. Yeah. And it's like, no, they didn't quite get it. No, they didn't quite get it. So they're kind of invested along the line.
Well, that's it. I mean, it's a fun thing to watch, but I know for a fact I used to watch it for the characters and the storylines, which is now lacking.
It is, yeah.
They've lost a lot of those bits. Well, obviously the guys got older. I mean, Mark Calway, who's the Undertaker.
Yeah,
I mean, he's just...
He really should have retired like 5-6 years ago.
Oh, I mean, he's wonderful, but he's just, he just lost it. Yeah. He's an old man now. I mean, he must be
you look at him, it's like, you're an old man.
He must be in his 60s plus, if not.
Oh, yeah, has to be.
And if he's not, it's the wrestling's really affected him. Yeah. But no, again, story, it's everywhere. It's, as we've just encountered through this whole chat. There's stories everywhere in every little niche of life.
I also say that I'm probably I am the one person in the Venn diagram that is a musicals fan and a wrestling fan at the same time. I'm that one person in the center.
Okay, I didn't even know that diagram actually existed for those categories.
Yeah.
I like this. Excellent. Well, Kyle, I want to thank you for coming on.
Oh, yeah, that's great.
This is, as I say, random. I don't have a set of questions. I like just to chat and see what happens. So I hope you forgive the mayhem. I want to thank you for joining me on the Bothy Storytelling Podcast, and hopefully we'll have you back at some point, and we can talk a bit more. I think we need to do an episode on wrestling mayhem.
I can get into some pretty deep territories. I started watching when the Mega Powers exploded, which was that's my very first wrestling memory of Macho Man and Hulk Hogan getting into fisticuffs.
Yeah. You know what? We're going to keep that for another episode. Yeah. I think we are going to have the Bothy Storytelling Podcast Stories of Wrestling episode. Yeah. And I think we'll need to get Kyle back to show us his passion of in the Zen diagram. Venn. Sorry, did I say Zen there?
Yeah.
I did. Okay, it's getting warm in the studio. The Venn diagram of Sondheim and wrestling.
Yeah, that's right.
We need to get the second half of this. So, Kyle, thank you for joining me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
It's been great.
Well, I want to thank Kyle for joining us today. This has been an absolutely fantastic chat. I mean, literally, I could go on for ages with Kyle and we could chat forever. And, as you heard at the end there, we have decided we might have to do a second interview and we might have to focus on the wonderful world of the male soap opera wrestling. Just for shits and giggles, folks. But we've been talking about some great subjects, and I think there's only one book that I can recommend today on the Bothy Storytelling Podcast, and it's Kyle's passion. It's Sondheim. So I had a look up because I'm going to be honest, I don't have any Sondheim books in my collection. But there is a book that seems to be very well reviewed, very well rated, and that is Finishing the Hat. Collected lyrics 1954 to 1981 with attendant comments, principles, heresies, grudges, whines, and anecdotes. And it's by Stephen Sondheim himself. It is a wonderful looking book. The reviews are all 5 stars. Everyone's loving it. There is a sequel to this book I've discovered just from doing some research, but I would have a look at this. It's on Amazon. It comes in about $35, but it is a book about Stephen Sondheim and kind of all these lyrics, etc. And let me just read a little bit from some of the sort of write-up. Penetrating and surprising, poignant, funny, and sometimes provocative. Finishing the Hat is not only an informative look at the art and craft of lyric writing, it is a history of the theatre that belongs on the same literary shelf as Moss Hart's Act 1 and Arthur Miller's Time Bends. It is also a book that will leave you humming to the final bars of Merrily We Roll Along, while eagerly anticipating the next volume, which begins with the opening lines of Sunday in the Park with George. So that's just a little bit of the sort of write-up about this book. Any Sondheim fan is going to love it. To be honest, if you want to find out more about Sondheim, I think you'll love this book as well. It looks and sounds fantastic and interesting, and that is Stephen Sondheim, Finishing the Hat. Collected lyrics 1954 to 1981 with attendant comments, principles, heresies, grudges, whines, and anecdotes. I love the fact that they've put heresies in that title. But there you go. That is today's book recommendation for this episode of the Bothy Podcast. And I can't not include Kyle's podcast as my ATB podcast recommendation for this episode. You all know we're a member of the Alberta Podcast Network, sponsored by ATB. Well, Kyle is a member. During our chat, you may have picked that up a wee bit. I don't know, folks. Maybe you missed that. But Kyle's got a few podcasts, but the one that we kind of did speak about a lot was Putting It Together. A look at Stephen Sondheim's body of work, show by show and song by song. Each week, Kyle Marshall invites someone in to discuss a Sondheim song in depth. And if memory serves, I know I've just spoken to him, 16 episodes on West Side Story rings a bell. So pretty in-depth, pretty good fun. I would definitely have a look at it, guys. That's Putting It Together by Kyle Marshall, and that's a look at Stephen Sondheim's body of work, show by show and song by song. So that is the recommendation for the podcast to listen to on this week's Bothy podcast. And with that, ladies and gents, we come to the end of another Bothy Storytelling podcast, and what an epic episode it's been. I'm looking at the figures here. We're well over an hour and 20-ish minutes on this episode, so I do hope you listen to it. Maybe I should have split that one up, but you know what? I'm kind of hoping if you run out of time listening to it, you can come back later. It's a fun episode. I enjoyed it. It was lovely having Kyle in the studio. Hamish joined us. Couple of cat interruptions. It's all there, folks. All the fun and adventure and musicals. Song be the fuel of life. It fills our happiness and makes us love. And I don't know what I'm even saying here. You know, you can tell I'm a crap storyteller at times. Anyway, folks, I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Bothy Storytelling Podcast. Do remember that we are still up for that People's Choice on the Canadian Podcast Awards. Please head over to Canadian Podcast Awards, click on the People's Choice section and vote for the Bothy Storytelling Podcast to win People's Choice. I would love it. I would be grateful. You know what? If you don't, I won't have Kyle back on the show. Oh, the harshness of me. I'm an evil man. But do go over and vote for me. I would love it. It would be beautiful. If you appreciate the show, there are other great shows on there. So, you know, if you don't like me and like them, I won't hold it against you. I might just find out where you live, get naked, hide in your fridge, and wait for you to come home. But to be honest, it's not an aggressive stance. I just like fridges. Don't worry about it, folks. Thanks very much for listening in this episode, and I look forward to hearing, seeing, and speaking to you all in the next episode of the Bothy Storytelling Podcast.